Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I am here to take a look at the Second Sun Control Challenger deck for Magic the Gathering. This is from the 2018 line of Challenger decks, and this is a version of the Second Sun Control deck that wasn't really a thing in Standard, but sometimes you need another deck for your Challenger deck set, and so this is what we got. We get a 60 card deck and a 15 card sideboard, as well as a spin down life counter. And let's go ahead and see what's inside. In our deck box, we have a spacer, we have one spin down life counter, we've got our sideboard, a divider, a quick reference card, which we don't care about, and an ad. Go ahead and take a look at the deck. Alright, pretty simple control deck. Some more threats, some life gain to counteract aggro decks, and some more counter spells to counteract other control decks. And that is what we have inside. I'm gonna play this against its peers and see how well it holds up, and I'll be back to let you know what I think. So we got to play with this deck a bit, and I have some thoughts. This is a control deck, and because it's a control deck, it's actually one of the harder of the challenge decks to figure out how to play it correctly. And so the immediate thought is that this deck really needed some sort of deck tech and strategy guide to help you to parse out exactly how you're supposed to progress to the end game here. Now the end game, based on the name Second Sun Control, is Approach of the Second Sun. The goal is to cast this card twice to win. There's 3 of them in the deck. There's a chance that you might be able to draw the second one naturally, but typically what's going to happen is you're going to cast this once, gain a bit of life, and this will go into the deck 6 down. And then the hope is to draw cards with Glimmer of Genius to cycle with the Irrigated Farmland to dig deeper with the Supreme Will, and also use the Ipni Rivulet to just mill cards off the top to get you closer to that second casting of Approach of the Second Sun. Until then, your job is to stay alive by denying your opponent with Censors and Supreme Wills in the early game. And then also, if your opponent is able to stick a dangerous threat, to throw an Aether Meltdown on it. If your opponent is able to spam out a board, then you have your Fury Gates and your Settle the Wreckage to take care of that as well. And then a cast out to take care of any miscellaneous issue that you might encounter. That's it. You're not winning through damage. Approach of the Second Sun is it. Towards that end, I think that this deck actually kind of works. I do think that there are some issues with this deck, particularly in that its potential to get run over is kind of high, and I don't understand what the Renewed Faith is doing in here at all, aside from just being a card that you can cycle. It doesn't act as well as any of the other cards in the deck, and also the other question that I don't fully understand is what Kefnet is doing here. Most of the time, this 5/5 for 3 mana is actually not going to be able to attack or block, because you're going to be spending your cards to prevent your opponent from doing stuff that will cause you to lose the game. Later in the game, maybe you're using this as card advantage to spend 3 in a blue to draw a card and then return a land to your hand. And then perhaps you'll be able to use Kefnet in a defensive way. But there's enough removal that deals with Kefnet, and when you're spending that much mana and picking up lands, like, are you going to be able to use Approach of the Second Sun when that time comes around? I'm not entirely certain. So I think that perhaps a strategy insert would have been helpful to also explain what Kefnet is supposed to do. And then we also have the farm as well in this deck, which I think is perhaps something that is supposed to be moved to the sideboard if you find that your opponent isn't playing a creature-based deck, but it's kind of a slow card as well, and then it costs 3 mana to destroy an attacking creature, and that sort of limits its usefulness as well. And so I kind of wish that there were some stronger control options here, and also some counter spells that don't have conditions to them in this deck that you can just counter whatever. If you get to the late game, your Censors and your Supreme Wills are not going to be as useful, and then if you're against another deck that has some sort of haymaker that they will have the mana to get out of your Supreme Will or Censor for, that you have some sort of way to deal with it. I think that's in part where the sideboard comes in, which some of it makes sense. Against aggro, you have your Renewed Faith to give you the life to survive, as well as the Regal Caracols, which will also create additional blockers with lifelink, and so I can see where those are supposed to come in. We have another Kefnet, which I think suggests that it's important to the strategy of this deck. but I cannot figure out what that is. We have the negates against control as well as spell pierces, which can be good if you need more censor slash supreme will style effects. We also have the glyph keeper, which is, I suppose, some sort of control threat as well that you can use to beat your opponent down if you need that kind of threat. And so I appreciate their inclusion, but I almost feel like they'd be more meaningful in this deck than Kefnet, because it gives you a second way to win the game aside from playing Approach of the Second Sun. Because normally you're just relying on this as your sole win condition in this deck. You're not going to win in any other way, because beat down by Kefnet is extremely unlikely against most other decks. And so I think that the Glyph Keepers might have actually been a better play in this deck than Kefnet, because at least it gives you a second way to win the game. You just get up to being able to cast a Glyph Keeper, and then the Glyph Keeper almost protects itself because you have to hit it twice in order to remove it. And so you're just continuing to be able to attack with it, and it embalms itself, so even if it does die, it comes back. And so I think the Glyph Keeper might have been more reasonable in the main deck rather than the one Kefnet here, and perhaps we'd get rid of the other Renewed Faith to put it in. But that is my thoughts with this deck. I think that of all the decks, this is probably the least powerful and hardest to navigate in terms of trying to figure out how to make it work effectively, because the decision points aren't easy, and so strategy guide would have been very much desired for this particular deck. But I'm glad that there is a control option within the challenge decks as well. If you have experience with this deck, whether we're talking about the challenger deck or the actual meta deck, let me know what your thoughts were in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of these videos, you can hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.